r/tales from tech support. 12 bizarre stories from tech support. Client cannot accept they're wrong. Hey TFTS, first time posting, which is odd since I've worked all my professional life in application support and couldn't think of a story to post even though I have thousands. My first job in London was providing first and second line of support to a reporting software my company built and sold to clients in the financial sector. We had two types of clients, hosted or in-house install. While the first were easy to debug, log into their environment, replicate and assess, all while having full access to the back end. The others were less so for obvious reasons, yet we kept a virtually stale copy of their initial environment to provide some semblance of support. This story, obviously, is about the latter type. The software itself was like Tableau, in which you add objects to a sheet, graphics, tables, images, to create a template, and the workflow fills in the latest data as often as you want it, daily, weekly, monthly, and generates the final report in the format you want, the most common being Word or PDF. Also, the software used a proprietary third-party software to convert Word documents into PDF. Don't recall which one it was, but we would buy the license ourselves and would give it to the client for their in-house install. We didn't only recommend this software in our install documentation but insisted that they use it since our product only supported this vendor in particular, meaning it could probably work with others, but we only tested this particular one, so could only ensure it works as expected with it and it alone. So, the ticket in question was floating around for a while, bouncing from one support member to another, and no one could figure it out. We were only 4 in the support team, so it was bound to land on my plate eventually. Also, side note, I was the youngest, by far, in the team, and my imposter syndrome was high, so I was dreading my turn to have a go at this issue. The problem was that the generated PDF reports were showing the objects completely misaligned compared to what they were supposed to look like. Moreover, this only happened when generating PDFs. Word docs came out as expected. So, this being an in-house installation, we could only try to replicate it on our end to no avail. A coworker tried to get a copy of their database to get our environment in line with the client's, but that was turned down because of sensitive information that they couldn't share. What's the point of non-disclosure contracts? Another coworker tried a screen sharing session, but all it helped for was to see the report being generated incorrectly, since their IT team wouldn't let us take a look at the back end and see if the software was installed properly. By then, the client was getting impatient with how long it was taking for this issue to be resolved. So having this information telling me how tied my hands were, plus the pressure on being the last line of defense, I do the first thing I can come up with. I check in Acrobat Reader who is the PDF producer of the file the client sent. Usually, you would expect to see the name of the third-party software as the creator, but lo and behold, the client was using some other tool for the PDF conversion. Why? As I said, we provided the license for free, so it wasn't a matter of saving pennies. So, I happily send my reply to the client stating, unfortunately, you're using a software we don't support. Please use product name, as is specified in our documentation. One would expect the issue to be closed. The client was caught red-handed using our software incorrectly, thus in breach of contract. However, as you read the title of this story, this was not the case. All I got in return was a condescending reply to my email CCing the account manager on our company and my boss stating, "This is ridiculous, account manager's name. This has taken long enough. Can't someone fix the damn problem?" I wish I could say the story had a satisfying ending, but unfortunately for me, my company was too British in their mentality and followed the creed of the customer is always right. I didn't hear back on this issue, and luckily that client didn't raise many tickets, so I didn't have to deal with them again. My guess is that the AM had to convince them to use the third-party software we supplied, but I never asked her how that discussion went. All I got was a chuckle from the rest of the team saying, "How didn't I think about that before?" And a pat on the back from my manager, which would come back and haunt me for the rest of my days at that company since I became known as the last resort guy, which meant I had to deal with all the troublesome tickets. Dia. Oh, that is what you meant. I do consumer tech support. Recently I had a very long call about a customer's elderly computer. Their display was showing 2 windows. Tried to remote in, no joy. Checked for documentation of what I understood to be the issue based on the customer's responses to my questions. No luck. After about 40 minutes, I realized that the customer's operating system had gone through an automatic update and wiped the customer's customized display, including the desktop photo and programs they left open, and it was that which prompted the call. 15 minutes later, I was able to guide them back to the way the computer looked before the update. Our target time is less than 30 minutes per call. Hopefully, I get some short snappers in the next couple of weeks. I just grabbed your Acer disk and it's all gone. New guy joins the support team and we share an office. I'm the more experienced one, so he's learning the ropes from me. On one of his very first days, he gets a request to upgrade Windows on a laptop for some big mucky muck. Thinking that he'll impress me with his initiative, he starts the process before I get to work. When I arrive, my new, somewhat reactive office mate immediately grabs me and starts in with, "I'm in big trouble, I'm going to get fired." I can see that he's really worried. I can't imagine what he could have done at this place that could get him fired so quickly. "Why, what happened?" I asked. "I needed to upgrade a Windows laptop for important guy in corner office, so I grabbed your install disk, and it wiped everything." "What disk did you grab?" He shows me a disk labeled Acer. Oops, that's not a setup disk, it's an automated system recovery disk, used for automatically mass installing Windows onto many devices at the same time. You insert the disk, turn on the system, and it immediately wipes the hard drive and installs Windows over the network. I still kinda smile imagining what horrors must have been going through his head as he saw the hard drive suddenly start going crazy, instead of getting a normal Windows setup screen. And then it wouldn't boot afterward? Oh, the pain he must have been feeling. I tell him what he had just done. He asks me why I would have such a dangerous thing in my possession, and actually gets kinda mad at me. He tells me that the laptop belongs to a high-level exec, and he's deathly afraid to tell him that all of his data is now gone. He's sure to be fired on the spot. I laugh and say, "No, you won't. Come with me, watch and learn, we'll take care of it together." He should have backups or copies of anything important. If he's in such a position in the company, then he's fully aware of his responsibility to protect his and the company's data. We go to the guy's office and I tell him what had happened. He's disappointed, really disappointed. I apologize for the accident, and tell him that we've removed every Acer disk so that it couldn't possibly happen again. He asks about data recovery. Sure, we can attempt that, but no guarantees, and it's expensive. I can tell that he's getting more agitated. As a subtle reminder of his responsibilities, I casually mention, for quite some time now, support has offered a few different services that will automatically back up your data and even your complete profile. You just never know. Even when things are going perfectly, when a hard drive might fail, a laptop gets dropped or stolen. He stood there and I see a transformation come over his face. He gets it. Yeah, I should have enrolled this into the automatic backup process a long time ago. He even knew the name of the backup software we were using. We eventually leave and never hear of it again. The new guy eventually moved to executive support, so I guess he was just a glutton for punishment. Check the hardware. TLDR at the end. Some years ago, I needed a particular sort of sensor for my biology research. It was neither high precision nor particularly complex, but it was strange. No one sold anything like it, so I designed and built the sensors I needed on a minimal budget, on a scratched-up table at home, using a soldering iron half my own age. And then, through a series of improbable events, this sensor got a lot of attention. It made the college I work at look good, and to this day if you search for my real name, what you'll probably find is the college's press releases about how my device will solve world hunger and cure AIDS while you sleep. As an indication that even the college did not believe this, they rewarded me with a $15 gift certificate at the local coffee shop. However, the computer science (CS) department did notice that I had just done something that looked very much like Internet of Things, and made me an offer. Instead of building my next device on a table at home using a soldering iron from the late Paleolithic, I could use their very nice lab, with lots of equipment, and even raid their parts bins, as long as I also passed off some of my knowledge to their students. And so I ended up spending a lot of time in the CS lab. This story comes from that time. Some details of actual projects have been fuzzed because specific projects would anonymize me quite easily. On the day this story begins, I am in lab laying out a circuit. As I am doing so, I am chatting with the students, a small group who I have come to know fairly well, who spend most of their free time in the lab tinkering with things. One student, who I will dub Hamilcar, who doesn't like the Second Punic War, calls me over for troubleshooting. I get up from my chair, careful to bring my cup of coffee with me. When troubleshooting with students, a cup of coffee is essential, because you can raise it to your face and take a sip from it to hide the fact that while your voice is saying, "That happens sometimes," your face is saying, "I don't think you've fully recovered from that brain injury." Hamilcar's project involves a speaker. He's quite early on in working on it and only has the speaker attached to an audio control board, amplifier, which is, in turn, attached to an Arduino. Arduinos are programmable microcontrollers. Hamilcar points to his screen where a small program is open in an IDE. This points should play a small tune through here points. But nothing is happening. When did it break? I ask. It never worked, he responds. This seems strange. I question him a bit more, as I think we all know the right way to build this device would be. 1. Wire up the speaker. Run current through and make sure you hear something. 2. Write a tiny piece of code that just makes some sort of noise. Verify that you can get the code on the Arduino and get noise out of the speaker. 3. Turn make a noise into make these specific noises. What Hamilcar has done is wire everything together, write a giant block of code, and then test it. Have you checked the hardware? I ask. Always start troubleshooting at step 0. I then have to explain that I mean, have you done anything to verify that the hardware works? It's wired correctly, Hamilcar says. This is not what I asked. Have you ever gotten any sound out of that speaker? I ask. A blip when you plugged it in? A short code snippet that just makes it hum? Anything to test it? No, Hamilcar exclaims, clearly unreasonably annoyed by these questions. Other students look up from their projects and stare at him in surprise. It's plugged in correctly. I'm not an idiot. I bring my coffee cup up to my face and take a long sip. But did you test it? No, Hamilcar yells. I understand, a bit, where his frustration is coming from. He does have some real skills from his own, independent study, and nothing he's done yet has been able to showcase this. He feels like we don't believe that he knows things. On the other hand, he's being an ass. I bring the coffee cup down and give Hamilcar the look. If you ever find yourself teaching teenagers or young adults, make sure to practice the look. Done correctly, the victim should feel the chill of the coming winter creeping into their bones and hear the distant howl of the first wolves picking up their trail. This is, I say, gesturing expansively with my coffee mug while continuing to glare, computer science. We test things, check your hardware. I then remind him that the day before I had wasted time debugging a bad solder joint. Hamilcar makes his saving throw against the look. I know how to solder. I point out that the years of his life are but a blink of my eye, and that while I had learned to solder as the great ice sheets retreated at the end of the younger dryas, he had learned to solder 2 weeks earlier, from me. And that his solder joints still closely resembled metal potatoes. You're not helping. No, I finally agreed, I'm not. And I won't, until you check your hardware. Then I walked back to my bench. And thus began the descent into madness. Day 1. Hamilcar has discovered that Arduinos are not very good at keeping time by themselves. He has a theory that this is, somehow, messing up the speaker. Perhaps the sound frequencies are being compressed into the ultrasonic, or something. He's fiddling around with clock chips, which are really only needed when your time intervals are hours or days. Obviously, this just further complicates his untested circuit and doesn't help. Day 2. Hamilcar spends an hour undoing his clock chip changes from yesterday. He is now convinced that he is running the Arduino at the wrong internal clock speed. This can happen to the chip brain of the Arduino, but only if you buy that chip yourself and wire it up. Inside an Arduino, that won't happen. Day 3. Hamilcar is now propounding a new theory to the other students. Arduinos use a C-derived coding language. But what if this language does not handle global and local variables in the same way? Much like the Carthaginian invasion of Italy, this theory serves only to cause a lot of destruction and get people angry without actually making any progress towards winning the war. Day 4. Hamilcar is bouncing his latest idea off another student. At this point, Hamilcar's broken circuit and his refusal to test the hardware have become a running joke. Before he gets past the first sentence of his new theory, the other student asks, "Have you checked the hardware?" Hamilcar explodes in anger. The other students just shake their heads, and I eventually have to tell him to use his inside voice. Day 5. Hamilcar is hunched over his station, muttering something in an unknown language. Is this a dark ritual to the old gods of blood and fire, meant to strike me down for questioning his soldering skills? Has he completely snapped and is speaking in a new language that makes sense only to him? I listen more closely. No, he's just swearing continuously under his breath. Day 6 is a Saturday. As a biologist, I sometimes have to come in to work on a weekend to keep my living study subjects, well, living. I had also glued some pieces together on a device on Friday, so I swing by the CS lab to see if they set up correctly, and, if so, to glue the next set. The lab is quiet, empty of students. As much as I like joking around with the students, it's relaxing to be alone and able to focus. I finish my own project and decide to check Hamilcar's project. If I can debug it, I'll steer him correctly on Monday. There's no multimeter on Hamilcar's station, of course, but once I grab one, his power and ground check out. The Arduino is pinned out correctly, and I'm getting power where I should there, too. The audio controller, amplifier is a bit of a mystery. I haven't used this design before. I unlock the computer and find that Hamilcar already has the wiring diagram open. Power is solid, ground is ground, LVL is, not attached to anything. What the hell is LVL, anyway? I know that the chip can do much more complicated things than what Hamilcar is doing with it, so maybe it's not needed. But debugging means figuring out what things are. I find a web page where someone is using LVL on this chip in their own circuit. I look at what they seem to be doing with it. It's not amazingly helpful. I bend over to poke at the chip with the multimeter, just to see if I can tell if LVL is output or input. As my head gets close to the chip, I hear a faint sound in the quiet of the room. I pick up the speaker and put it up to my ear. It's playing a tune, right, LVL, as in, sound level. 30 seconds later, I've decoded the wiring diagram and have LVL attached to 5 volts power. The speaker is humming out a tune clear as day. I leave a text file open on the computer. Checked your hardware. Amplifier on chip was not powered. 2 months later, we're sitting in lab. A new student loudly complains to no one in particular that his starter exercise, get an LED to blink, isn't working. Did your LED power on solidly when you first plugged it in? I ask. No, the new student says. Does that matter? A wave of apocalyptic fury breaks over us, a roar of sound and anger. It's Hamilcar. Check your damn hardware. TLDR. Student has an issue with a program. I tell him to check the hardware. He doesn't. It's the hardware. Can you rebuild our company? Several years ago, I worked as a software developer for a company that provided network and desktop support for our customers. This story is about a new customer we got, that was an e-commerce business. They hired us to fix some of their servers, but the problem was much, much deeper than that. It seems that the company had, over a period of several years, gradually let go each and every person in their IT department. The last IT employee had provided a couple of Word documents containing some server IPs and admin credentials, and then they let him go. This seemed to be part of a larger pattern, as the company was housed in a large business complex, which they used to fully occupy. However, half of the building was now unoccupied, a significant portion of the building was sublet to other companies, and the current staff was maybe half a dozen people. This company had over a dozen servers, but no network diagram, and no one there who even understood what most of the servers did. Our techs did their best to sort it out based on the documentation from former IT, and managed to restore the server that failed. That server failing was what prompted the company to reach out to us. A couple of weeks later, I was called in to meet with the person running the company. The actual owners were completely removed from the company's operations. It was simply a cash cow that they had zero involvement with. It seemed that separate from the initial failed server, their e-commerce site was now broken. Keep in mind, this e-commerce site is literally the entire product of the company. They wanted me to fix the site. However, they didn't have any documentation for the site. They didn't have anyone on staff who understood the codebase. They didn't have credential to the source control. They didn't even know which servers the application was hosted on. Apparently, they had outsourced 100% of the development of the application to Russian programmers, were in the US, nearly a decade ago. The programmers built the app, configured all of the interactions, and provided zero documentation, or possibly the company discarded the documentation. After some investigation, I discovered that the application was actually scattered among at least 3 different servers. 2 of the servers were AWS, and the company did not know the username and password of the AWS account. They did have credentials for the 3rd server, but that was simply the host for the front-end interface and a customer mailing list. All of the actual business logic, which the manager I was working with could only explain in the most rudimentary terms, was hosted on those 2 AWS sites. I did find the problem, an expired security certificate, and we got them back up and running, but I did my best to explain that if anything else went wrong, there was an excellent chance that there would be no way to fix it. 2 weeks later, the site went down again. One of the AWS sites wasn't accepting HTTP requests anymore. When I explained that I couldn't access the server to find out what was happening, because they didn't have credentials, I was asked if I could just rebuild the application on a new server. I told them that it was possible, but that I'd need someone to explain, in detail, all of the necessary business logic, and that they'd lose their customer database, again, no credentials, and have to start that over from scratch. They said, "Oh, okay," and that was the end of the conversation. I have no idea if they're still in business. My computer won't open since you guys worked on it. So, let me bring you back in time to when I first started working in IT. Which was roughly a year ago. Before I had worked this job, I had zero IT experience, just my experience of solving problems by Googling them, and building computers, coding a little, stuff like that. So I had been hired for this job, which was a consumer tech store, with a help desk that the general public could come to and pay us to fix their machines. It was my very first day. I had been showed around the shop, had people show me the ticketing system, and watched a few interactions with some customers from the more experienced techs there. They decided, hey, he seems ready to man the front counter and take the next few people that come in. So, they let me just hang out and wait. Cue the user. An older woman walks in with her laptop, plops it on the counter. Me. Hi, how can I help you? User. Well, I had you guys replace the screen on my computer, and now it doesn't open up. She had a laptop, and was clearly irate at the fact that we could be so incompetent as to give her a laptop back that didn't even open. I watched her attempt to open it. The problem was clear. She was attempting to open the laptop from the hinge side. Me. Alright, well, let me go ahead and give it a try. I place my hands onto the laptop lid, and simply slide my fingers under the display, and open the laptop, making sure that I don't open it from the hinge side. A 50-50 chance, but by God I did it. The laptop is open. I look at her. She looks at me. I don't really remember what I said, but it was most likely something like, well, looks like it's working now. She called me a smartass and left. This was my very first issue I troubleshooted in IT. This issue is what made me sure that I could do this job, and I would be good at it. I was filled with confidence, and it was a great first day. To this day, it boggles my mind that this occurred. This woman picked up her laptop from us. We make a point of showing the user that the computer works and their problem is solved when they pick it up and pay. In the case of a laptop screen replacement, we probably turned it on and showed her it worked. It just shocks me that this person, who most likely saw it be opened and working, took it home, attempted to open it, and always tried from the same side. It shocks me that this person, instead of doing literally any level of problem solving, picked up their laptop, got into their car, and drove to our store, had me open it, and drove back to their home. I would assume they invested at least 30 minutes round trip. To this day, I'm still not quite sure what to say to people when the problem is them and it is very clearly them. I usually just say, haha, we all make mistakes, I guess, but even this feels insufficient. Document your network, or else. Way back at the turn of the century, 2001 I think, I was working in a university computer research department. The guy who had hired me had moved on and I was the only support person around until we could hire someone. Our network infrastructure was pretty primitive, no firewall, no managed switches, and poorly documented cable mapping. Our primary patch panel had over 400 drops, some were labeled with what room and plate number they connected to, many did not. The wall plates in many offices were not labeled, or worse, incorrectly labeled. At this time, we didn't have a cable tracer. One day I got an email from the university computer security guys. They had been contacted by someone reporting malicious activity from the university. The IP traced back to my department. The IP was on one of my Class C networks, so I went to work to find the malicious machine. We had a lot of students running self-administered systems in those days, so this was not completely unknown. The problem was our switches were so old I had no way to find which switch port was connected to the bad system. I could narrow things down to a stack of switches. Each had 48 ports, although not all were connected. I set up a laptop running a ping to the bad IP and started pulling the patch cables one at a time. Really basic, right? I found what appeared to be the correct connection after a few minutes. So, the immediate problem was solved. This system was off the network, but I still needed to find the system, find the student, ensure the system got patched, all that jazz. I traced the patch cord to the patch panel. It was labeled with a room and plate number. No problem. I had a sub-master key so I could access every office in that area. I walked to the room and found no computer, no monitor, no keyboard, not even a desk. There was a lot of junk, old chairs, a futon, a partition, so the room could be divided for 2 people, lots of various trash on the floor. I guessed one of the grad students had actually been living in it, against the rules, but it happened. I was really scratching my head, checked the wall plate in the room, nothing plugged in at all. There were a couple of old power cords scattered around, but no computer. Went back to the server room and repeated all the steps, confirmed I had disconnected the correct switch port. I spent some time checking nearby offices, in case the wall plate was in a different office, but found nothing. It was really bugging me, so I went back to the original office and did a more complete search. And of course, there was an old desktop computer, no monitor or keyboard, hidden behind the futon and connected to a second wall port. I left a "please see me" note on the computer, removed the network cable, and asked our department administrator who was in the office. No one was. Okay, who used to be in the office? Some student, no longer at the university. Back to the office, yanked the computer. It wasn't a university-owned computer. Student must have bought it himself. I stored the computer and figured I'd wait to see if anyone complained. No one did, so after a month or so sent it to e-waste. I also created a project for myself, get a cable tracer and a label maker, and had some students start checking and labeling the drops in the whole department. There were many occasions when I'd get a request to activate a wall plate and spend an hour trying to figure out which patch panel it connected to. Role perception check. Critical failure. Sue. I just read the funniest email about a ticket I had worked on last week. I had a user call in last week saying that her laptop webcam doesn't work in any application. I asked her to try it in Teams and in the Microsoft Camera app. She says she had, and it doesn't work in either. No worries, I'll remote in and take a look. Sure enough, it seems like the computer thinks the camera is working but just seeing black. I asked her if there was a shutter on the camera. No. I asked her if there was anything obstructing the camera. No. Nothing like a sticker, or anything behind the glass of the screen. No. No damage, no nothing. No. I asked if there were any switches near the camera. No. So you can see the camera lens in the center top of your screen and there is no damage or obstruction. Yeah, it's all clear. Okay. Maybe there is an issue with the sensor and the software isn't recognizing a problem with the signal. Time to troubleshoot. So I went on to try a bunch of typical solutions, reinstalled the drivers, did Windows updates, tried disabling and re-enabling or removing and re-adding the camera in Device Manager, tried looking on the Dell site for the latest drivers for the camera. I go as far as to update all the drivers in the BIOS on the computer, nothing is working. I ran the Dell diagnostic tools and it runs through, doesn't seem to attempt to fix anything, just comes up at the end saying failure with a warning exclamation symbol, no error code, no nothing. The Windows hardware diagnostic tells me the camera is fine. I call Dell and tell them we have a device where the camera is not working and nothing I have done seems to fix it. I'm getting an error from the Dell diagnostic, but there is no code or description. We need a technician to come out. They ask me the usual about physical damage, BIOS and driver updates, etc. But they agree we need to send a tech out. I give Dell the client's contact details with the OK from the client so that Dell can organize a warranty visit with the client. They have called the client to confirm there is no damage and do their own troubleshoot and everything. I get the email Friday to say the technician is en route. Awesome, the client will be happy with a quick turnaround. I finish up for the day as I am on the early shift where I work. Job well done. I just checked my emails today to find the technician's report and opened it because why not? Let's see what the problem was. I want to know if there was anything I had missed or that I could check in future, as you do. Technician's notes. Opened the shutter. ... Opened the shutter? You what? I just wish I was there for the moment that the Dell technician walks in, opens up the laptop, and flicks the camera shutter open. I would have loved to have seen the Jackie Chan confused look on his face and the look of total embarrassment on the client. Lesson of the day. Clients are stupid, and there is no winning. TLDR. Client is obtuse, misses camera shutter when directed to check for one. Dell warranty technician finds it instead. Magically changing network addresses. Another story from days working support in university. Several years ago, my department outgrew the office space in our building. We made a deal with another department in the building next door to get some additional offices. In return, we provided computer support. This wasn't too hard since their computer needs were not as difficult as ours, plus the network was 100% maintained by our campus network team. Late one afternoon, I got a call from a graduate student in the other building. The desktop system he had appeared to be working, but he had no network access. I thought maybe the network card was bad. This was an older system that used a PCI Ethernet card, so I grabbed a spare and headed over. Since this machine was on a different campus network than our department, it used a local username and password, like a laptop, so we could log in even without any network connection at all. I logged in and started troubleshooting, checked the network config and restarted networking. Linux box using DHCP, and it got an address, so I was stumped for a moment. I kept poking around and restarted networking, forced getting a new DHCP lease, stuff like that, and then the shoe dropped. I was getting an unroutable address, 192.168x when I knew that the campus DHCP server gave out addresses in real university IP space. I checked another computer in the same office and it had a university IP. Since unroutable IPs were blocked at the building gateway, no surprise this machine had no internet access. At this point, I guessed someone in a nearby office had probably plugged in a wireless router so they could have their own private Wi-Fi, and it was configured to serve DHCP on the wired side. I looked around the office, but there wasn't anything there. I restarted the DHCP client on the computer a few times and finally got an address on the proper network. I told the student that he should be okay for the rest of the day and called the main network guys and explained what I found. They asked me to try and find the rogue DHCP server, but I explained I had no keys to any of the offices and at almost 5 o'clock, so sorry, I was out of there. I knew they had master keys to every building and office, unlike me, so it was up to them. I found out the next day someone had come over and searched around until they the router and yanked it. I'm guessing they left a nasty note for the owner. WFH laptops devastated by users. This is part tale of woe, part help desk request, part discussion about devices that are used primarily WFH. I had a user call in about a few keys on their laptop not working so well. User is user, SR is me. User: hey, how's it going? I've noticed a few of the keys on my keyboard don't always work. Shift and a few of the letters on the left, specifically. Senior: alright, is this on an external keyboard or the one on the laptop? User: the one on the laptop. I've restarted a few times, it's still not working well. I remote connect, update some drivers, even flash to a previous restore point, it's the same issue, making me think it's something hardware related. I ask them to bring their laptop in for a swap, and so that I can replace the keyboard. As soon as the user leaves, after testing the new computer, I pull the old one out and it is disgusting. I do not say that lightly, it made me nauseous just to look at. This laptop was covered in grease, food particles, dandruff, and ash. Every possible crevice on and around the trackpad and keys was packed with detritus. My only regret was not getting a picture. I hosed this thing down so that I could stop gagging. I've seen this a lot more now that people are WFH. Devices come in either gross or totally filthy because they don't have to worry about coworkers seeing them commute on a device covered in grime. It's messed up. The sickest thing to me is that the user never mentioned the state of this computer when troubleshooting. And I'm still trying to clean it so that we can use it. It's less than a year old. Mr. Know-It-All does not know it all. A while ago, I got a funny ticket from a well-known problem user. He had it all. Thought he knew everything, was impatient, acted disrespectfully, and best of all throttled his system every chance he got. I can't count how many laptops this guy went through under my care. One day, he put in a ticket about not being able to connect to the VPN. My stomach sank and I knew I was in for a bad morning. Usually, these issues aren't too complicated, but this guy took things to another level with his complaints and general bad nature. I start off by making sure he has the right access. Check. Next, I look at the firewall logs to see if there's any errors coming from his system when he tries to connect. There are some errors, but they actually don't point me anywhere useful. I'm a bit lost at this point and illogically try to ping his machine just because I don't know what else to do other than tell him to reinstall his VPN client. Surprise. It works. Oddly enough, it doesn't have an IP from the VPN's DHCP scope, which makes no sense. I fired back a carefully typed email asking where he was connecting from. He replied, "From company HQ building D." Turns out this genius was visiting the company HQ and trying to connect to the VPN but couldn't figure out why it wasn't working for him. He could have accessed everything on the network without the VPN but instead tried and failed, then got frustrated and made a ticket. Of course, upon realizing his mistake, he left no reply, whereas on other tickets, he will leave complaints if the solution doesn't perfectly fit his needs. Moral of the story: everyone makes mistakes, even people who act like they don't. How I quit my first job as tech support. I quit a gig as tech support after a particular customer where I was called on a Saturday morning because the laptop was completely dead. Laptop was stationary and I knew the customer was well known for being unreasonably rude as well as willfully ignorant with tech, managed to destroy 2 keyboards within months by typing. I was woken up by the call and while still trying to figure out where, who and how I was tried to guide the customer trough basic troubleshooting. Is there any sign of LED light being on, fan spinning, HDD spinning, press power button for 5S, is the power brick plugged in, does the power brick feel warm, are all cable connections solid and plugged in? All of the questions were answered in the negative in increasingly rude and aggressive manner. Finally decided to drive there. My hourly rate was $10 back then. Don't ask, I was young, desperate, and thought the guy the first worked for would actually teach me valuable skills in the process. The other catch? I was only being paid for time spent with the customer or on their machines, not for traveling. 5 hours later I arrived with a full set of tools, equipment, spare power brick and even a replacement laptop in case the old one committed Sudoku. Customer was pissed that I took this long. Again, I want to reiterate that it was Saturday, now 9 a.m. After going over the routine checks myself, the customer got even more mad, claiming, "I already checked that, you told me on the phone. Do something. It's all your fault," etc. I tried to ignore her. Yes, it's exactly what you think. The woman was the typical stereotype of a self-important Karen. After 5 minutes I checked the laptop and could not find any signs of life whatsoever, so I checked the power brick. Surprisingly, it was plugged in and warm. Then it hit me as I checked the other side where the cable leading to the laptop was plugged in. Naturally, it wasn't. Cable management was non-existent under her desk, and between 3 PCs and about a quarter ton of paperwork on and under the desk with equal amount of dust, she or one of her numerous cats and little kids that had access to the office must have accidentally unplugged it. Plugged it back in. Laptop works again. 10 minutes of work that could have been avoided if the customer actually did what I asked and actually answered my questions truthfully instead of ignoring them and simply saying no every time. In the end, I received a whopping $10, spent 5 hours of driving, $20 on gas, and the better part of a Saturday on a loose cable. Needless to say, I don't work for this particular company anymore. I did, however, take over several of his clients that were friendly and respectful and needed continued support. It turned out after he hired me, he fired every other tech he had in the area and was now unable to provide service to anyone in half the state. This particular story was just the last straw in a long line of particularly frustrating assignments, including things like being forced to drive 2 hours to a customer to install a new wireless keyboard, driving 3 hours to a customer to install an Apple docking station on a Windows laptop, and fix a broken mouse at the aforementioned lady's office, aka insert the batteries in the right direction, all the while being only paid for the actual labor, not the time spent on the road. In the end, I did learn valuable lessons, but not from my employer. Nice. You have made it to the end already. Thank you for watching. If you aren't already subscribed, please do so, as there will be more videos like this in the near future.